Hello, everyone. I came across a really cool case about analyzing how a person likes to dress. Yeah. I'd like to record a separate short video about style so that we can see how, in a natal chart, you can actually look at how a person should dress. What specific preferences a person has in clothing, what they like in terms of style, and what to pay attention to in general. I'm going to share my screen now so you can see. We'll be looking at a natal chart, and I also have screenshots from a conversation with a girl. So, why did I actually want to discuss this topic? Well, it all started when I don't remember which video I was recording for YouTube, but I received a comment saying that we behave the way nature has programmed us to. In other words, a melancholic person will never become a sanguine one. So, the essential point is that we truly cannot change or become someone we're not, right? And in fact, I very strongly agree with this opinion because I really try to convey this fundamental theory throughout all my content, since it's undeniably true. The point is not to become someone else, someone unclear, but to unpack your own inner nature, which we often suppress, right? Because society already imposes certain expectations on us about who we should be. And even as children, we start kind of moving against ourselves, right? And then as adults, a lot of things just don't work out for us. And that's exactly what astrology is for, right? To help us remember those forgotten parts of ourselves. That's what many people tell me during my courses as well. In other words, you give people the opportunity to remember, right? And I really love this phrase because astrology truly gives us the opportunity to remember who we really are, not to change us, not to turn us into people we are not, but to awaken what is inherent in us by nature. Because every person is unique and, well, special, right? And it's important to understand this uniqueness. But modern astrology, yes, often promotes the idea that if you don't have fire in your chart, you urgently need to add it. You can actually find a lot of such videos, right? Saying that if you haven't developed a certain element, you urgently need to. I even recently came across advice that if you lack fire, wear red, be more proactive. So this kind of hype begins, and you end up trying to fit into a costume that doesn't suit you at all. In other words, you become someone completely different from who you really are. And I completely agree with the girl who wrote that a melancholic, meaning what is given by nature, cannot just become a choleric, a sanguine, or anything else. Because that's just their temperament. That's the kind of temperament a person has. Indeed, I wrote about this in my stories that if you don't have a certain element, then you don't need it. It means you have other tools that you can use to live your life. So your task is to unlock and strengthen exactly those elements that you do have. Yes, maybe you have a lot of earth in your chart, maybe you have a lot of water, and you feel things differently. For example, you're a more sensitive person, more of an empath, and so on. But the thing is, the way the elements are counted there is also incorrect. Just looking at which sign a planet is in is not enough. So you need to understand that there are also aspects, yes, and other things that influence this element, meaning that this element can be overridden. For example, if all your planets are in Capricorn, it still doesn't necessarily mean that this element will actually be strongly expressed. Specifically, the earth element will not necessarily be strongly manifested. I mean that it's not the only one working for you and no other element is active. No. But the point is that you need to strengthen what you have and not go against your nature. That's why I agree with this girl. In response to this story, yes, I was told, they also say things like how to correct Venus if it's not in Taurus, Libra, or Pisces, meaning in its exaltation or domicile signs. That means once again that you have to go against your own nature. So if Venus is in Pisces, Taurus, or Libra, that means it's good. Yes, so that means it's good because Venus is the planet that is responsible for femininity, for some of our external complexes, for how we relate to our appearance, our choices, and so on. If it's in these signs, then everything is good for you. Your finances are good, your relationships are good. In other words, all Venus-related matters are going well. But if not, then you urgently need to work in that direction. Yes, so if your Venus is in Capricorn, for example, you need to become like Venus in Taurus. That's the kind of thing people actually write. Yes, you can see things like that. That's nonsense. Again, that's working against yourself. In other words, it's self-sabotage. If you were born with Venus in Capricorn or Venus, I don't know, in any other sign, like in Scorpio, for example, which everyone supposedly hates, then that's your nature. You're comfortable living with that nature, and it actually feels great for you. So if you have Venus in Scorpio, being like Venus in Taurus would actually feel uncomfortable for you. That's something you also need to understand. So I'll write that I asked in more detail, right? Like, should I develop the qualities of Venus in its domicile? Domicile meaning Taurus, yes. And then I'll supposedly become more attractive. And this girl has Venus in Capricorn, right? So that's why she's asking this question. Why does it seem like it doesn't matter that your Venus is in Capricorn? You still supposedly need to become like Taurus, right? And it's often written that Venus in Capricorn is a negative sign, like a sign of exile or fall. These are considered bad signs for Venus. It means that everything will be bad with your appearance, with your relationship with yourself, and with relationships in general, and so on. And if Venus is in Capricorn, if it ends up in Capricorn, then it's considered terrible, right? And here's my favorite. If Venus is in Capricorn, then you have to dress strictly in black tones in business suits. Yes, and now we're smoothly getting to why I even wanted to talk about appearance in the first place. Using the example of this girl, yes, we'll break down why this classic description that if Venus is in Capricorn, you need to wear business suits doesn't quite work here. I'm going to explain all of this now. If you dress in business suits, you'll supposedly be more attractive, but I don't really like a strict black and white look. Yes, so this is what a girl with Venus in Capricorn is saying. Let me close all of this now, so it doesn't get in the way. So this is what a girl with Venus in Capricorn is saying. She says that she doesn't really like a black and white look. Well, supposedly the classic recommendation for Capricorn is a black and white look. Where does this classic recommendation even come from? Because Capricorn is a sign ruled by the planet Saturn. Saturn, if we're talking about the natal chart, is associated with the sphere of career. That is, it rules the 10th house, let's say, right? And accordingly, career, right? So that's our dress code, and that's where it all comes from. So it turns out that Capricorn really does correspond to this energy, this classic style when you wear a white dress shirt, pencil skirts, classic trousers with creases, right? So these recommendations are just pure classics, right? The kind you can find on the internet very, very often. But we forget that even if Venus is in Capricorn, it can be, well, why does this girl, for example, say she doesn't like it, even though her Venus is in Capricorn? Well, because aspects also play a role, right? Aspects that are connected to this Venus. And in addition, this is something I talk about a lot in my courses. I won't go into too much detail right now, but there's also the factor of planetary affliction. By planetary affliction, I don't mean just when a planet is in a certain sign. For example, Venus in Capricorn, right now you could say that it's not in its own domicile, not in Taurus or Libra, but rather in the sign of its exile, yes, exile or fall. So Venus in Capricorn and Venus in Scorpio are considered afflicted according to classical astrology. So, I mean, all those internet interpretations you might come across. But in this case, Venus is under stress not because it's in Capricorn, but because it's being hit by a huge number of aspects and quite tense ones at that. For example, Jupiter is hitting it with an opposition. An opposition is a tense aspect, and conjunctions with the outer planets are also considered stressful. And here there's also another sextile, well, you could count two, Mars with Pluto. Yes, so they seem to be harmonious aspects, but still, the amount of tension outweighs them. That's why Venus here will be tense, and a tense planet often doesn't fully express the energy of its sign. That is, Venus in Capricorn will, so to speak, outright reject this energy. In other words, it will seem as if she's pushing it away from herself. So here, this can actually interfere in life, yes. So if we're talking about money, for example, this Venus might push money away from herself, but that's something that needs to be looked into. But right now we're talking about appearance. And actually, in the context of appearance, this might not be a problem for this girl. Yes, so she just says, I don't like it, and well, whatever, right? So, well, okay, if it doesn't bother you, that's fine. But there are some nuances here, yes. So if it doesn't get in the way, that's good. But the very fact that she writes, yes, like I don't really like a strict black and white look or gray, so I have to force my own taste, not like myself in the mirror, just because Venus is in Capricorn. Yes, but here we see not only Capricorn, yes, so here there's also a Neptune aspect. Neptune is about fluidity, right? It's about multicoloredness, yes. Because Neptune is a planet of gradients. Yes, it's pure, it's absolutely this kind of iridescence, this multicoloredness. So I ask, right, what do you like? Lightness? Well, I kind of anticipated that Neptune was involved here, and when I saw it, I asked, do you like lightness? Regarding the fact that, yes, aspects aren't taken into account when making recommendations, and unfortunately, it's impossible to do so. They decide what you like. So, really, when you write some general recommendations on the internet, right, when you describe some Venus, I can't predict what specific situation you will have next. That is, Venus in Capricorn can be pure, just Venus in Capricorn without any aspects. Then a black and white look will appeal to the person, right? Because this Venus is responsible for the psychology of what I truly sort of like, what I enjoy, Or, for example, Venus could be with Mars. In that case, Venus in Capricorn won't be so classic anymore. The style there will be more provocative. Yes, you could still wear a blouse, but you'll already want like to unbutton a couple of buttons, right? Or if it's a pencil skirt, it won't be below the knee, but above. Or for example, you might add a slit. So it's like the classic style is already shifting into a more Mars-like tone. Yes, it could be. Like here with Neptune, when I like it. There's also Jupiter here. So this girl might actually prefer these kinds of tones. Yes, brighter ones. So this is classic style, but it will already be mixed up thanks to the aspects. When you write general recommendations, you can't know exactly what aspects a person has. Accordingly, the astrologer can't take this situation into account. That's why people often say that your horoscopes, your astrology, the natal chart, it's all nonsense. Because you have to look at it personally, individually. That's exactly why I'm showing you this example, right? So she writes that she likes colorfulness, yes, this Neptune, this gradient, this colorfulness. Plus here we have an aspect from Jupiter. It's too much, it turns out. There's some kind of excess of Jupiter. You could even say brightness. Jupiter and Neptune together are very much like an excess of brightness. So it turns out I like colorfulness, and when you said that Libras are like parrots, I understood why. But my ascendant isn't Libra, and I wasn't talking about the ascendant or Libra, I was talking about Gemini. Gemini are our parrots. Why? Because you see this axis of Sagittarius and Gemini, right? So when everything is very, kind of like Sagittarius is a very complex energy. Accordingly, Gemini is like yin and yang. As the opposite, it's a very light energy. So, like certain dress codes and such, that's more on this side towards Jupiter. But Gemini is more like, a Hawaiian style, really a kind of parrot-like style. So, when there are these, men often have these, I've seen them, they used to be very popular. Not sure if they're still popular now, but those shirts with floral patterns, those really light tennis style shirts, that's pure Gemini. So, when you put on all sorts of different jewelry, when there are lots of colors, when it's all bright and multicolored, and in this case, in this particular case, since we have an excess of Jupiter, an overload, we need to dilute this energy because it's interfering too much, right? So Jupiter is, in other words, the opposite of Gemini. So we will balance out this Venus with Gemini. It's exactly this brightness, right, that feels comfortable and appealing, isn't it? And it does a great job of balancing out this aspect. And thanks to the fact that this girl wears all this colorful variety, meaning she brings in Gemini energy, this lightness and all that, she compensates for certain, perhaps even flaws in relationships. Yes, in relationships, in finances, and so on. Because she dilutes things, she lightens them up. Well, that's also true. You just need to understand it. And about the parrot, yes, in this case, maybe, I don't know, maybe I made a mistake on air, but right now I'm just explaining that the parrot, specifically this parrot-like energy, this multicolored and vibrant quality. By the way, that's something that's often attributed to Aquarians, but actually it doesn't concern Aquarians at all. Aquarius is very much Saturn is exalted there. How can there be any kind of flamboyance there if it's actually about classic style, those classics, trends, what's popular, but definitely not flamboyance? So yes, if that's really the fashion right now, that it's cool for you, right? If you wear a raspberry colored jacket or, for example, paint one eye bright green and the other black, then that's going to be cool, right? If it's fashionable, then it suits Aquarius. But if it's not fashionable and you dress like that, then it's just dumb. So for Aquarians, it will look dumb, but for Geminis, it will look normal. So that's why, right? And for Aquarians, since they don't have that energy of lightness and colorfulness, there's strictness. It's either classic or whatever is fashionable. That's the only thing we go by. But Geminis aren't like that. For Geminis, it's actually like that. The very symbol of Gemini is parrots. That's why as a pair, right? So here you need to distinguish these things. In this case, it doesn't harm her. On the contrary, it helps her. That's one. And yes, she writes that her ascendant isn't Libra. Different kinds of fabrics, but mostly natural ones. I also like light ones. Yes, because Neptune is the energy of lightness and so on. And regarding Libra ascendants, yes, if we're talking about that here, I don't remember what she wrote next. Let's take a look. Cotton underwear with mesh. It all depends on my mood. By the way, this is also cotton underwear with mesh. So these are natural fabrics. Naturalness, that's Jupiter, right? Naturalness is also Neptune for us, or this lightness, mesh, romanticism, all of that fits here. It depends on the mood, I see. And before you, everyone was saying that Libra ascendants are all about the color pink. Yes, let's talk about Libra now. Look, here you need to immediately understand the difference, right? When we talk about clothing style and in general how we like to dress, it's always a combo. Yes, that's Venus, that's about what feels comfortable for my body, right? I'm simply comfortable in it. I really enjoy it. And the Ascendant shows how you need to dress in order to simply be noticed. It's like when you dress according to Venus, and for example, men don't pay attention to you, but as soon as you dress according to your Ascendant, you immediately start getting looks. Let's take this aspect, for example. In other words, you just become noticeable. The energy of the Ascendant always highlights you and makes you stand out. So yes, Libra in this case is also a very interesting sign because Libra is responsible for harmony. Libra is ruled by Libra is ruled by Venus. So accordingly, all sorts of flowers. Yes, Venus, Taurus, here it's all about flowers. Why do you like flowers? She wrote about that. Why do you like ice cream? Yes, and naturalness. Because all of this comes from Saturn. This is the energy of Capricorn, of Saturn. Saturn is also exalted in Libra. Yes, the energy of Saturn is present there. So, of course, the classic style, again, the truly classic, the standard and traditional dress code look is a very fitting and exceptionally appropriate choice here. That is, if a woman really wears pure classic style, it will suit Libra very well. But she says she doesn't like it. Yes, well, she kind of rejects this energy to some extent. So it depends on her mood, yes. I think it's not that she completely dislikes it, but it depends on her mood. Sometimes she can, because after all, there's a conjunction, but not always. So there is a certain kind of rejection. And because Venus is not exactly harmonious in the chart, right? That's why there's a kind of rejection of this energy. But the point is that Libra is also a sign ruled by Saturn. So in this case, classic style would be very appropriate. But Libra isn't just about classic style. Libra is, first of all, again, about dress code. Yes, dress code, what's considered appropriate. What does that mean? It means that if you're going somewhere, you need to understand how people dress there. Because if you show up and stand out from the crowd, people will notice you. Yes, but they'll notice you in a negative way because you've expressed your Ascendant, but not quite in the way that's needed. So here it's very important to follow the dress code for Libra. When Libra is on the Ascendant, it's important to follow the dress code and dress the way others do. That's the first thing. Secondly, classic style works here. Thirdly, Libra is, how to put it? Libra is a very romanticized sign. Well, in the classic sense, yes, what you see floating around the internet, it's all just pink color. No, Libra is first and foremost a sign of harmony. Libra is Libra, yes. So you need to weigh how you dress. If that dress with flowers looks great on you, if it's harmonious, then why not? Yes. So if you're going for a walk, your look matches where you are, that will look really good. So Libra is about not just throwing everything on yourself at once. Yes, so here you can actually go overboard because there's compensation going on, of course, due to Gemini. But if you're all sparkling and super bright and you show up, say, at some meeting, it's going to work against you. People will notice you and kick you out. Well, I'm exaggerating, of course, but you get the point. Yes, that's how it works. But Libra isn't just about the color pink. Libra is about classic style. It's gray, it's lilac, it's those black and white iridescent tones, right? It's also about floral patterns. It's about things that harmoniously combine. Pastel shades, yes, and even ruffles. This is what is beautiful and does. It highlights your femininity. Since Venus rules Libra, that is everything that is feminine. Well, it's like flowers, yes, dasha, a dress, some kind of tenderness, yes? Tenderness. Libra is tenderness. Now it all fits here. This is why the color pink is often attributed to Libra. Pink color for Libra, and that's it. But not only that, you just need to understand what kind of energy is embedded in the sign. Here, classic style works really well. I write, yes, that it's not Libra that's classic, but rather the dress code. But there are a lot of nuances there. But specifically for you, Neptune and Jupiter influence Venus more. Although I don't think you'll deny that classic style suits you. Not liking it is another matter. Classic style really does suit you here. It suits you because it's inherent in Venus as an energy, meaning it enhances femininity. In fact, if this girl wears classic style, it will create a certain resistance. But through this resistance, certain insecurities will come out, some issues, maybe some blocks, maybe certain relationship topics will be worked through, and suddenly some long-standing conflicts will surface and dissolve thanks to this. So you start to get into this vibe. But if you don't like it, that's fine, you don't have to do it. But just because Libra is on the Ascendant, life will still, one way or another, make you maintain this kind of dress code. I like minimalism in jewelry. Minimalism is the energy of Mercury. Minimalism is also the energy of Saturn, Capricorn, right? Because Capricorn is not just about strictness. Capricorn is also about luxury. And when you don't just pile everything on yourself, like if you don't cover yourself in gold, let's say earrings, bracelets, everything imaginable to show off how cool you are, but instead, for example, just wear one expensive watch that highlights your status, right? Or maybe, for example, some kind of gemstone that stands out against a black dress. So that's enough to convey this energy of luxury. That's it, that's Capricorn. And she also writes, yes, that she likes minimalism in jewelry. And plus, it's a great compensation for Mercury because the opposite energy to this Jupiter is actually Mercury. That's how we work with opposition, yes. In other words, we replace opposing energies. So she writes, I like minimalism in jewelry. Sometimes I like it to be simple but elegant. Simple but elegant. Mercury, this aspect is working. It works well and elegantly. So the energy of this Jupiter combined with Capricorn means elegance. But I write that this is pure Capricorn and Libra because Libra is also responsible for elegance since Saturn is there as well. That's it. Well, here, actually, it turns out to be a very harmonious story, right? But at the same time, I love brightness, brightness. Brightness comes from Neptune here, so if it's a black dress, then there should be some flowers. Yes, so there's some romance, some Libra, some little flowers, so Libra. I have a bright phone case and at the same time a holder with a pink stone. So again, that's how I am. That's what I carry around, right? The Ascendant works with big stones. I really look like a parrot's phone. Well, yes, this could just be a way to compensate for this aspect. Because Venus is specifically responsible for things as well, for objects, for what we use. These are our resources, so to speak, right? So from what I've read, you channel the energy of Capricorn and Libra purely, just not in the classic way that everyone interprets it, but in a normal way. Yes, well, as I explained. Yes, well, I came across those recommendations too. It's boring, office style. Well, for Venus in Capricorn, the classic recommendation is really to wear office style. And I was once sent home to change because the Lyceum had this classic style, right? And I showed up in bright blue pants or trousers because the Libra part wasn't being followed. You have to dress as is customary. That's why I said that circumstances will still push this person to follow the dress code. When you break the rules of that ascendant, of the sign on the ascendant, which in this case is Libra, it's not really about being flashy, actually. You might like flashy things, but how you need to dress, how you need to show up in the place where you are, Libra is exactly about that. You need to follow this dress code. And in my mind, it was acceptable to wear bright pants. In my mind, in other words, what I like, it was acceptable to wear bright pants. So she dressed according to Venus, but so to speak, channeled that energy into the ascendant, since here the ascendant is actually ruled by Venus. So in a way, she boosted her Venus, yes. She poured her energy into the ascendant, and it's like she's either accepted by society or rejected. So for Libra, that's the kind of dress code it is. So that's how we can combine things. Venus will show how I like to dress depending on what kind of Venus it is, whether it's harmonious or not. Yes. So the sign may be accepted or not accepted. Whether you feel comfortable in the sign of Venus, the one it's in, depends on what kind of Venus it is. Yes. That is whether it's harmonious or not. Next, we take aspects into account. Aspects make adjustments. This whole like-dislike thing, yes, so this style will be adjusted depending on what aspects are present. But how does society perceive you? Where and how are you supposed to express yourself? Yes, so that already depends on this, on the sign of the ascendant. Because here it could be the opposite, yes. So for example, Venus in Capricorn, I like to dress in a classic style, but let's say the ascendant is in Gemini, and people perceive you as someone bright and flashy, right? The kind who puts on all sorts of things at once. So there are a lot of these little details, yes. That is, you actively express Mercury's energy. And then the focus shifts to the fact that you become unnoticeable in that classic style you like. You need to be more vibrant. As soon as you start to slightly adapt to your ascendant, of course, we can't completely change our nature. Well, you can't really dress in a way you completely dislike. But you need to at least minimally take this ascendant sign into account because it will adjust how you perceive external circumstances, as that's how they will unfold. In other words, this girl wouldn't have been kicked out of the classroom if she had come in, well, at least not in bright blue pants, but in, say, pastel blue ones, right? Then everything would have been fine, harmonious, but she stood out, right? She really drew attention to herself. That's why, of course, with Libra, this was stopped. That's it. These are the kinds of nuances. I hope now there's at least some general idea, some overall picture of how this looks. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Yes, Later, I can also look at your situations. Just make sure to write your details first so I can see your birth dates.